adaptable. This now brings us to our second panel discussion, and the topic is the big picture, paving the path for growth through disruptions. I cannot wait to hear the insights and the conversation that we're going to have. I would like to invite to the stage our esteemed moderator, Courtney Fingar, who I have seen in action. She's one of the best moderators I've ever seen in action. She's the editor-in-chief Investment Monitor. Please put your hands together as we welcome Courtney Fingar, our moderator. And as our panelists get ready, I just want to remind you, this is probably going to be the last call for you to participate in the Republic Bank Limited's giveaway for the Amazon Echo Dot. I understand that they will be giving away an Amazon Echo Dot every single day. And all you need to do is scan the QR code, and we will put up the QR code on the screen, but you can also do it at their booth. So I think everyone is getting ready. Is it possible to put up the QR code as we get everyone ready? I'm not too certain. This is your last call. In Jamaica, we say if you don't have a ticket, you do not stand a chance. So you can scan the QR code right here. Or maybe if you're going to the restroom or you're taking a quick break, you can pass by Republic Bank Limited's booth. And that will enter you to possibly win an Amazon Echo Dot. So just reminding you, this is the big picture, paving the path for growth through disruptions. Again, we want to thank you for making it the Caribbean Investment Forum 2022, hosted by the Caribbean Export Development Agency. We want to thank the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as well as Kuiper and the other platinum sponsors for making this possible. We want to bring it to your attention that we do have 3 panelists here, and we have one who is joining us remotely. Our moderator is ready to go. Courtney Fingar is the name, Editor-in-Chief Investment Monitor.
Very best in the business, and it's not an easy job. So please give her a round of applause because she's doing an amazing job. I've had this gig before, and I know how hard it is. So thank you again for the introduction, and mainly to the organizers for the opportunity to lead this panel. I'm a little biased, but I think it's an extremely interesting topic because we're going to really talk about how to surf all the waves of change, and there's plenty of change that's been going around in the global economy and the world in general in recent years. And obviously it's been a time of crisis, turmoil, and just when we kind of settled down a little bit from the pandemic, there's now war in Europe and inflation running rampant and instability everywhere. So this is a really great chance to take some learnings from some business leaders and find out how their organizations are really navigating this time of change. So change is always difficult and stressful, but it also presents, especially for business, an opportunity for evolution. So if we try to take the challenges in that spirit, we can unpack how this disruption is shaping the landscape of business, what impact it's having on this region, and in general, how you can find growth through disruptions. And those disruptions can be external factors, like I mentioned, but can also be disruptive technologies. And I think all of the gentlemen here on the panel have some experience with that. So that's enough out of me. I'm very excited to hear from all of you. I will introduce each of them to you very quickly now. and then I'll be inviting each one to share your headline thoughts with us before we pick up on a few questions. Next to me is Kieran White, who's a co-founder and CEO of Return Protocol. This is a platform that enables access to blockchain-based voluntary carbon markets. I hope I got that correct.
Got that right.
And I'll leave Kieran in a bit in his opening remarks to tell us a bit about how that applies perhaps to a market like the Caribbean, and tell us a bit more about your technology and your company. In the middle here is Lance Hinds, who's CEO of the Brainstreet Group. This is an ICT services firm located in Guyana. Lance has more than 25 years experience in providing ICT solutions, both for the public and private sector agencies, so he can maybe tell us how both of those realms are adapting through change and how they might be using technology to do it. Joining us remotely, we have Yoni Epstein, who's a founding chairman and CEO of ITEL. This is an international customer experience provider with 16 facilities across the nearshore, joining us remotely from Jamaica, I believe. And finally, we have Wade George, who's executive chairman of EY Caribbean. Now, you'll know EY, of course, very active in the region, one of the supporting partners of the event as well. And Wade also will be able to share a perspective, perhaps, of EY itself, but also, more importantly, the customers that you're working with and some of the challenges that they're facing. So let's get to it. First, let's start with Kieran. Kieran, why are you here? Tell us a bit about your company, how it views a market like the Caribbean, and more importantly, how you see disruption as a path to growth.
Yes, and awesome, and thank you for the intro. Got it absolutely right. So I'm Kieran. I'm the CEO of Return, and what Return is we enable on-chain access to on-chain environmental assets, and that's this really scary word. So to break it down a little bit, we operate in the intersection of voluntary carbon markets and crypto. And so for those of you that are unfamiliar, voluntary carbon markets are a way for sort of corporates and individuals to buy a thing called carbon credits, which sort of, in a roundabout way, funds the hopeful removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. And so one carbon credit usually equals 1 ton of CO2 removed. And then there's a lot of problems in the moment with the voluntary carbon markets, sort of broadly saying that the markets really need to scale in order to reach sort of the planet's net zero goals and to reach sort of Paris Agreement's temperature goals. And so there's a lot of problems with scalability, and so that's sort of where blockchain comes in. When you sort of enable transparent ledgers and really enable people to fully see, understand, and bring liquidity to sort of environmental assets, enables a really easy path to growth. And so we're sort of in this interesting sort of disruptive phase where the voluntary carbon markets are expected to grow about 30 times by 2030. And blockchain, which is obviously blockchain. And so that's sort of two really disruptive industries. And what we do within that is we enable people to look at, use, identify, and sort of build business use cases around on-chain carbon credits to start with. And the reason that I was super interested to come to this event is that, and I was saying this to a few guys last night, is that the Caribbean, and I'll give a big shout out to a project called Collectivo, who are doing this in Curacao. The Caribbean has some of the most amazing agriculture and environmental sort of aspects that can be leveraged to, one, sort of enable the planet to be much more sustainable, and two, just sort of leverage carbon credits. And so Trinidad specifically, for example, have this amazing blue carbon population that's currently not as much being utilized, and so that's sort of down to things like mangrove plantations and coral reefs. Well, that doesn't sound super interesting. Blue carbon is one of the most disruptive environmental aspects that can really sort of sap and control that carbon. And so that's why I'm here, and why super bullish on how the Caribbean can start to sort of equip markets like this and sort of really bootstrap and become one of the leading forces of regions within this space, because you can't control geography. And so the Caribbean has some of the most incredible geography for things like environmental assets, but not currently the tools to do it. And so we're building some of that infrastructure to help people gain access to things like that. So yeah, that is me.
Thank you. I'll just sneak in a very quick question. Do you find that business partners, customers, and government entities here are receptive to these types of disruptive technologies that you're bringing and leveraging?
I think somewhat. I think it's a really hard space because you have the carbon markets, which already are sort of full with like confusion and strife, and that's why blockchain sort of comes in. And then you have blockchain, which is like its own like box of confusion and strife. And so I think it's still got a long way to go in terms of like proving out the tech and that it actually scales things. I think people have been super responsive, but I'd say like anything, like that understanding curve is so broad that it does take a while to fully get your head around. So yeah, somewhat I'd say.
Good. Still progress to be made.
Yes,
That's
100%.
Good. Lance, from your experience, and what are you seeing with your clients, and what kind of disruptive technologies or even market disruptions do you think could benefit the region longer term?
Well, one of the things that we were forced to do, especially with the arrival of COVID, is that there are many practices that companies like myself have been recommending for years in terms of moving faster to your online space, be able to run your business a little more efficiently, a little less, a better management of your resources and what have you. And what happened to us at COVID is at that point, well, then you had to move. So we're in the consulting and we're also in the education space. So one of the things that we had to do in those years is to help the kids get online. How do you deliver the education? You can't just move chalk and talk from the classroom and straight online. You have to make the changes to the curriculum. So all of those things have been challenges over the years, and we've been trying to show them innovative ways to be able to do so. Coming out of that now, they say, well, okay, well then let's agree you're going to stay where you are and then continue doing that work. What we ran into at that time is Guyana, unlike many of the other territories, we have a large hinterland area. So while you can easily solve those problems in the cities and also on the coastland, the difficulty was how do you continue to help the hinterland students and the hinterland residents be able to access some level of education despite the fact that you have COVID, you can't go to school, you can't attend, teachers are not in the hinterland areas like they should be. So we then had to work on remote learning systems and actually setting up small networks in these small villages using solar power and doing some creative things to make sure that it is possible for the kids to get access to some level of education during this difficult time. That is a work in progress for a variety of reasons. You have to make sure the power is there. You have to make sure that the teachers are trained. So there's a lot of onboarding that you have to do to make sure that that those services are there. So I think we're in a constant stage of trying to find solutions and using innovative technologies to be able to do that at this time. So I think we're still a bit in flux, but it's looking good. I'm going to tell a story a little later on in terms of what else we're doing, where we got hit specifically with the disruption and how we approach that.
That's perfect, because I do want to ask in the next round here about the lessons that you personally learned and professionally through the crisis. But if I can ask you just quickly now, Lance, COVID was obviously an accelerating force for digitalization and because of remote working and remote schooling, as you mentioned. And so the challenge there is in the ICT infrastructure, as you alluded to. Do you think the crisis, did it spur the necessary investment and improvements in ICT infrastructure around the region, or there's still some ways to go there?
I think it varies. And that's because the implementation went well in some areas and didn't go well in others. So now you start to hear the philosophical discussion as to whether we need to go here based on our experiences that you have. And you could have a simple conversation. Parents says to me that a child costs her more at home all day long as opposed to sending her to school with an allowance, for example. Now that's a simple conversation, but it weighs into the decision-making processes as whether they want the student at home over a long period or as soon as it's safe, send them out. That then affects how much money you're going to commit to putting in infrastructure, whether it's home or whether it's in the office. So that is a mixed, that to me is a mixed bag. in terms of what happened and what's happening so far.
Yeah, and I guess the necessary investment has got to come from the public and private, so that gets into a broader discussion about the role of private capital, which we heard some about in previous sessions, and which we may well return to here. But I'll turn to Wade now, and like Lance, you are working a lot with clients around the region. And also your own firm is needed to evolve with the times. So would you like to add anything to what you've heard from your co-panelists so far and tell us a bit about your insights here?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here and also to be a sponsor of this seminal event. In terms of reflection on what I would share with you today, I thought about what it took for us to be whatever measure of success we have accomplished in the region. And I would say it's more or less around 5 generic principles, which I think are not necessarily earth-shattering or disruptive, but I look at them as more tenets, which we strive for and don't always meet, because we are, like any other organization, not perfect, and we are certainly not infallible. But for me, I think the first one is we are purpose-driven. So our mission and purpose is to build a better working world in the Caribbean. And we heard a little bit from the panel today around how important financial statements are. So without financial statements, which is the language of business, and the authentication and verification of those financial statements, you don't even have a financial system. So that's the bedrock, and what we do matters. When it comes to things like sustainability, we've been working with governments on monetization of carbon credits. So it's just not about the exchange of service for consideration, but it's actually making a difference. The second principle I would say is trying to operate as one Caribbean firm. So we recognized very long ago that multinationals don't look at a territory, they look at a region. And of course, our larger companies that operate would like a company that can operate with them with a regional footprint. So what we tried to do about 2 decades ago is actually try to duplicate that. And it's obviously easier said than done. There are multiplicity of currencies, there are different cultures, there are different laws, there are different regulatory requirements, and we have been able to overcome that over time and through persistence and hard work, but I think to the benefit of our clients, who can now be served from a single point of contact throughout the region. The third thing is solution orientation. So there's an old saying which goes like, to the man with the hammer, everything is a nail. And what that really means is, if you come to someone who's a tax advisor, they will define the problem as a tax problem. But as we all know, business issues are far more complex than that. And therefore, it needs a multidisciplinary solution in many occasions. So you may need, let's take an example of a regional restructure. There will be tax implications for sure, but there will be financial, there will be governance, and there will be other issues that need to be worked out, including legal. Therefore, the only way to come to a solution is to bring a multidisciplinary team and work together with that. So I think that's something that we strive towards, and obviously I would say accounts for some measure of the success we've had. People centricity, people talk a lot about people first. When you really ask yourself, what does that really mean? For us, it means attracting the brightest and best people. That means we have to stay away from same think. Same think is, can only be addressed by diversity and inclusion, right? So 65% of our population or our employee population are women, and 50% of our senior leadership team are women. So again, that's a very important aspect of what we consider to be our success factor, and something that we hold true to, because someone can actually enter our organization as an employee and leave with an equity interest as a partner. And I guess the final thing I would like to say around the whole issue of technology is the following. Technology in of itself is not a strategy. Technology enables the business strategy. And to give a good example of that we have obviously benefited from international investment in technology. But one novel way we've been using technology in most recent times, where an opportunity has developed, is There are tight labor markets in the developed world, and we have been able to enter into business process outsourcing with our US firm. So we have hired a pool of secretarial support and graphic artists. These persons now work from their home and supply services to our US firm. I think the opportunities here are exponential, and it goes to the warmth of our people. It goes to the ability to serve and serve well. Many other features that I think are attractive, right? And what makes this even more attractive in the new geopolitical setting is the fact that we are a friendly shore jurisdiction, i.e., the political risk does not really exist to the same extent in the Caribbean. So I think, in a nutshell, those less than disruptive, those less than earth-shattering principles have accounted for a lot of our success.
Thank you. Some good principles to work with there. And do you have any good examples that you'd like to highlight in terms of digital transformation in the public and private spheres around the region?
Yeah, so what we're seeing a lot of is, well, two things I think to point out. One is international funding. International funding is available by bodies such as the IDB, the World Bank, the European Union, around digitization and government digitization. So we're seeing some projects in the Eastern Caribbean and in Jamaica, for example, around that. And we've been able to lend our expertise in a certain areas as part of a team to enable that. We also see a lot of digitization, of course, in the financial services sector. And that goes to both the back office functions as well as the front office. Now, of course, the front office function, which is a digital bank, is a lot more involved and a lot more innovative. But certainly, you could imagine that financial services, by its very nature, is digital. There's no such thing as physical holding of money in any major quantum. So we are seeing a lot of action in that space, and certainly what is great for the region is the fact that there is the ability to access this international funding once you're well prepared to access it and to perform the job well.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to Yoni now, and thank you for your patience and for joining us via technology. Now, Yoni, one of the big trends that we've seen as a result of COVID and many of the disruptions that it brought is nearshoring or friendshoring that became a bit of a trend bordering on a craze. So given the business that you're in, how have you been able perhaps to capitalize on that? And what do you think is the impact for the Caribbean? So in other words, have you had a good crisis?
we
Thank you. And how does talent fit into the equation? Because obviously there are an awful lot of people employed in your centers around the region, so you probably have a pretty good insight to share on this topic. And are the skills levels evolving, and how does the workforce itself need to navigate disruptive change?
You know, the talent pool is always going to be one that is the most challenging to successfully achieve. And the only way, in my opinion, to achieve that for the frontline job is to be able to diversify to the region. There's no one country or a couple of countries in the Caribbean and Latin America that can handle anywhere near to what the Philippines can handle. But if you diversify through it, you will be able to achieve that. In saying that, we have a very large and strong team that both digitally and on the ground are working on a everyday basis to meet the demand of our clients from a recruitment perspective. The one thing I would say though, the second part of the question is, we really do need to look at the training as well as the educational system across the region. And one of the shortcomings that I find is in middle and upper management, more so in the ability for critical thinking. I've not found any Caribbean country or Latin American country that don't have a strong talent pool, smart individuals, determined individuals, hungry individuals. But what I find across is how do I transition naturally someone from an agent into a supervisor role or manager role. And a big part of that shortfall is that critical thinking where, I can look at a data set and I can see where my KPIs are good. I can think of my opportunities, I can think of my threats. But when I get on that call with that client, it's like because I have a lot of confidence and I don't have the educational training of critical thinking, my ability to display what my issues are, how I'm going to resolve it, ends up being I'm just giving a readout of the data that I see on the paper, and then I'm waiting for the client to tell me what I need to do next. So, that's where I see the biggest opportunity across the region to be able to move people from one level to another level along the job ecosystem.
Thank you very much, and I'll bring in Lance here because you are involved in education, so you might have something to add to what Yoni said. And do you agree with his assessment about how talent needs to evolve as it applies to the ICT sector?
Yes. The question, however, is who exactly is going to do that, and who is going to be ready to provide the kind of talent he is looking for. It's the same thing with developers and coders and that stuff. So it's not necessarily an organic pool in many parts of the Caribbean. So the question is, how do we do that? Who is going to, at the policy level, decide that Yoni, needs this kind of talent, because of the scope and the space he has in the Caribbean, this is the kind of stuff that you need. So the way that works is really at the policy-making side. Who is developing the content, who is doing the platform, and who's providing that sort of base education, kind of farming system, crudely put. But who does that in order to make sure that he's getting the kind of talent that he wants, and that there is some pivot in that in that arena. In Guyana, where oil and gas, we have a similar situation where you don't have enough people to be able to do the kind of engineering that's required. So it has to be a situation where you working in tandem with government, academia, or the private sector to be able to see how you build that talent pool. That's, and especially in our case where the numbers are small and we're in all these disparate islands, we're going to have to find a joint response to be able to provide the kind of services that Yoni is looking for.
Right. Thank you. And very, very quickly, you said you had a story to tell us.
Well, I was going... One of the things that happened to us is that just about the time that COVID hit, we were looking to pivot. We were going to widen our offerings, and we were going to get into agribusiness with using the experience of IT to begin to work. And what we ran into, I think, had to be the height of disruption trying to get started. So if it wasn't COVID in terms of being able to just operate, and then run into climate change on top of that, where certainly in 2021 and 2020, the rain was, in those seasons, in the harvesting seasons, it was just too much. So we had to go back and decide, well, how do we do, well, now we had to decide, how do we apply the technologies to be able to do this far more efficiently, get the yield we're looking for, understanding that climate change reduces the harvesting seasons. So how do we make sure that we optimize during the periods where we have the sun and we have the flowers and we have all that to get that done? We do believe with the solutions that we are putting in, just in terms of making sure that we know exactly, we're doing bees, by the way, commercial beekeeping. So we're going to get to a point of knowing exactly when they're going, when they're going to harvest, based on sound, based on weight, based on a series of sensors that we put in there and those kinds of things. Access remotely so we can sit down in Georgetown and see exactly when we go to do what we need to do, because we need to be accurate because the harvesting seasons are shorter, so we need to make sure we still get the same kind of yield despite the challenge. So we are doing that, and then it occurs to us, however, that this is where the disruption comes, because everybody is still traditional in terms of that industry. It's very traditional, and they go and they check. So we are keen to see that when we put in that solution for ourselves, how that is going to be applied throughout the industry, and if others are going to take it on and stuff like that, in view of what is coming.
Yeah. Because
those disruptions really vary, and it's like a moving target. So how do you respond to that, in that field to be able to do it? So we are quite keen to see how that is going to work.
Well, we're keen to see how you do it as well. But it is a good illustration, I guess, about the challenges of applying new technologies to what is an old industry, which is something that's being confronted, not just here, but globally, especially as relates to agriculture. We're going to open up the floor in a few minutes to questions, so get ready. I hope you'll play along with us and ask us some questions, because it's more fun that way. But first, I would like to ask Kieran and then Wade any final takeaways you want to add, lessons learned through the crisis, or other insights you want to be sure that you leave the audience with.
Yeah, for sure. I think Wade said it really well earlier, that it's like, and you said it quite well as well, that we have this incredible technology, and I feel like broadly, and I feel that we're somewhat sort of getting to the point as a species, depending upon the problem, obviously, heavily caveated, where we in reality have a lot of tech to solve most problems. It's just really how you deploy the tech. And so, like, to truly understand, and someone like Lance, for example, like, who is on the ground with those, like, farmers, basically, like, the people who deeply understand and have insight of the actual problem you're trying to solve, no matter where that problem lies. We found anyway, was like, with the amount of money, like, for example, crypto, I think, has 20, 30 billion of, like, dry powder waiting to be deployed into the space. But, like, the amount of, like, wasted money and resources about, like, trying to solve a problem without understanding the actual insight is so broad, that we found anyway. So I think that's the one thing I wanted to highlight from Wade, especially, is, like, tech is great and it's got a lot of uses, but I think the use is only as good as the use case, and the use case is only as good as the insight. So I thought that was super interesting.
It's a good way to connect the dots there. Thank you. Wade?
No, so what I would say is, I think what COVID taught us most is our ability to be resilient and to find innovative ways to deal with adverse circumstances. And to be honest with you, when I reflect on the Caribbean, I do think that we have our fair share of adversities. We have weather-related crises. We have the issue of the international business sector being curtailed significantly by actions by international bodies. So we do have our fair share of challenges. Our balance sheets of most of our governments are not perfect. So the question then becomes, well, what do you do in the face of adversity, and where do you find the opportunities? So I think we talked about that a little bit in terms of friendly shoring and being able to provide services to the international markets, which are very tight. But there are other opportunities that we just need to continue to be open to innovate for. And I think we have a resilient people that are able to adapt. And, that's what I saw most, especially throughout the COVID situation, and I hope that we continue with that sort of innovative approach to adversity, because we have our fair share and it's not going to change.
Thank you very much. And Yoni, I'll ask for your main takeaways as well.
You know, I think we said invest in regards to technology. Technology is definitely an enabler. When people look at me in our capacity in the industry, so what AI is going to get rid of agents. When is that going to happen? What are we doing about that? And you know, I don't look at it as a threat. I look at it as an enabler. And I think we've learned a lot over the last years how to use technology to make ourselves more efficient. And in the sense where our agents are talking to thousands and thousands of people on a daily basis, so that they through email, chat, or voice. And to be able to take data of that level and to turn it into insights that we can provide to our clients on their business. I think that is a big way that we've been able to differentiate ourselves in this region and in this industry over the last couple of years. Don't put it as a threat, but put it as an opportunity and finding your business case around how you're going to be a differentiator to your clients.
Thank you very much. And let's open up the floor now. And if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get a mic around to you. I see a gentleman there in the back, and if you tell us when the mic comes who you are and who you represent. I hope there's a mic coming around. Yes, just got a bit of a walk to get to you.
If not, he'll just have to shout really loud.
Exactly.
Back to the good old days.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emerson John Charles from the Innovation Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm very interested in this aspect of disruption. We all know that it's easier said than done, especially for incumbents. And even though COVID forced many firms to use technology and pivot, there are many instances, especially in the public sector, where we see them rolling back to the status quo with how things were before. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that they don't have the type of management systems to support innovation. And right now, the International Standards Organization, the ISO, has developed innovation management system standards that any firm could follow. And I would like to know to what extent will you all support firms to pursue those standards, and would you encourage more persons and the government to support the implementation of these standards, even though many persons don't think that innovation and the management systems of it can be standardized?
Thank you very much for the question. Who would like to field this one? I'm gonna force Wade to answer if there's no volunteers. But really, if I understand your question, it's about this international standards and how we make sure that they're applicable here, and also that the momentum of the disruptive change continues and we don't go back to business as usual.
Well, I actually think that this is one of the pieces of good news for the Caribbean. Because what we have seen over the last 3 to 4 years is a lot of willingness on the part of international agencies. I mentioned the IDB, the World Bank, the EU in particular. And we're talking hundreds of millions of US dollar availability to governments to pursue various forms of digital strategy if it's properly implemented, obviously, if it's properly tendered, if the project is properly managed, et cetera, et cetera. So to some extent, we would play a role in that. But I do think that there's a huge impetus for this. And I am very optimistic, actually, that most of our governments have gotten behind these initiatives. Of course, it's easy to have an idea, but of course, without the money or the funding, it's always difficult to implement. The good news is that the money is there. There's no question about it. We're seeing it across the region. So the money is there. Once you approach the project in the right way, the international agencies are willing to fund it. And of course, the standards of implementation would be important in that regard. The standards of procurement would be important in that regard. The standards of the project management team behind it would be important with that regard. And of course, the milestones developed and reached. So it's properly monitored to some extent, which you would expect. But I think this is really good news on that front.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Lance? Go ahead.
Sure. I was going to say that, it is definitely a direction that governments have to take. I think a lot of them are moving a lot faster towards it. But, it's easy to say we're going to take this transition, and we're going to transition the public sector from being very old school and paper-driven to being more digital and being able to have a single source of way to get permits and approvals, and those are things that need to happen sooner rather than later. Because in the last round of the discussion about access to international capital, greater foreign investment, the reason that this region is not sought after greater is because unless you have somebody that can handhold you through the bureaucracy and the red tape across the region, you're not going to get that level of investment. And people want to see where you can log online, pay your taxes, start a company within a matter of a couple hours. People would always online, get your approvals for development, and that's what's going to drive real transformation across the region in the public sector.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I sometimes worry about a couple of things. Like, I sometimes have to go back 2 steps because the technology, the implementation, what you need, what's done is there. I have to worry about the process. I have to worry about the buy-in. Because we can talk about single window solutions and so on and so forth about wanting to collapse the application process into a reduced amount of forms, the reduced amount of days, the amount, the approvals, all that's being done, and all the bureaucracy and stuff like that. The trouble you have, in my experience in many instances, is that you have a nice conversation upstairs. And when you go downstairs, so they send you off saying, well, we fully support the process and this is what we want to do. This is what we want to get done. Please go down and talk to my line managers and let's get this thing going. And that's where the fun starts. Right? So, so what happens so everybody has got to be a little more on board and saying, well, this is the kind of stuff we want to do. We are truly committed to reducing the bureaucracy. And as a result of that, we're going to begin to put in the action steps to do it. But a lot of that back-end work and that fundamental work, I think, I must confess, in 2022, still needs to be done in some areas, in order to move it in the direction that we'd like to see it.
Sure, that's a fair statement. And for sure, in the world of foreign direct investment, we talk a lot about one-stop shops, and we're not always really just one stop, are we? So thank you for that question. Do we have others? You're shy or sleep? Oh, am I missing someone? Yes, sorry, missed you there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Trisha Beckles, Tobago House of Assembly. I think the general question I would have is, where does the cohesion really start? We come to sessions like this, as it was said, and everybody's committed to the types of transformation that will help us all be better as a people. And like was just said, when we go back, you don't get the action involved. So I want to touch on, let's say, the education aspect of it, where you have a public that is willing to be a part of it, but there's no cohesive direction provided, maybe by the powers that be, maybe by the persons with somebody articulating a vision that can guide the process, that can give the potential investors an idea of what timelines we are working with, what we identify as priority in order to engage the publics, in order to engage the investors, in order to engage even the students who tend to get their own knowledge through the internet and these different areas. How do we bring those entities together, and then how do we prioritize so that we know how to allocate resources in order to make it happen, where we can say maybe in 1 year we identify these key sectors, whether they be technology, whether they be the schools, whether they be in the technocratic areas, maybe the public service, which is a bigger aspect of it, but totally necessary. So then my question really is, who do we look to prioritize, to put forward a vision, a policy document or something that would guide how the process takes place in any one of our countries, and then we can come together as a Caribbean to pool these ideas and these paths that we define to put the vision forward and see it enacted on the Caribbean level.
Thank you. It's a very excellent question and a quite tough one. Who wants to take? Who wants this hot potato? No? But I think that actually illustrates the challenge posed in your question.
It is not for lack of attempt. In 1998, there was a CARICOM connectivity agenda. In the early 2000s, we then moved from that to the ICT for development, and then we moved to our regional digital network, and then we moved now to the CARICOM ICT space. There are volumes and pounds of documents talking about strategic direction and where we should be heading, and painting visions and missions and values and outcomes, and and all kinds of things all over the Caribbean. At the end, and they get presented, I assume, to the heads of government, and be it noticed and be it observed and being recognized. That's a fancy communique you get at the end of the meeting. And so at the highest level, everyone has to commit to it and pass the instruction down. I remember going to Dubai, and I was there for about a couple of weeks, and everything was, from getting a domestic taxi, pizza, whatever it is that you did, everything was digitized. And it struck me about how across the board they were using ICT for basic services. So I said, well, how long did this take? They said 15 years. No, 50 years. That's short, trying to get this stuff done. Well, what happened was the emir got up in the morning and said, make it so, and there we are. Now, but we don't have that kind of decision-making process here. But one of the things that happens is that the plans are there. The person who made the question, if she goes back and checks as well, she's going to see quite a few documents in terms of how do we plan to do it, how do we digitize the public service, how do we do the schools, how do we prioritize. It is that larger strategic plan and vision that will determine everything else. So if you've got, in national development, if you've got the 4 pillars that talk about, you must have education, you must have health, you must have prosperity, you must have security. So if you've got those 4 pillars that you work around, well, the question is, well, how do we get to where we need to go? And that is where the rubber hits the road at the end of the day. But it's not that the plans aren't there. It's not to say that we are not short of writing pounds of document. It's just that at the end of the day, we have to be able to execute it. And that's where sometimes that's just where the weakness is.
Yeah, right. It's the ownership of these plans.
It's the ownership, exactly. That's what it is.
Wade, I'll make you answer this one as well.
The same question?
Yeah.
Well, certainly I can't really answer from the policy perspective and the government, because we have advised, but the implementation we have often found vacuitous. We don't know where it goes, right? I think I would like to take this from a slightly different angle, which is I've always seen a low-hanging fruit, and not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the region, as a business facilitation unit. And we have pockets of that. We have sort of InvestTT, which liaises on behalf of investors to try and make things happen more smoothly. But to me, the rational way to adopt this is, one, if you have an attitudinal bias towards business facilitation, and then you structure a cadre of representatives from various ministries and necessary regulatory bodies. So you might have environmental, you might have town and country planning, etc. You put these all together, and you use that unit as an acceleration unit for business, and that's not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but anywhere, and there are pockets of this, then I would think that that is one very simple way to help reduce a lot of the bottlenecks that at least inhibit private capital operating and mobilizing very quickly. And even as an advisor in most of the territories, we find ourselves as intermediaries between business and government. But we quite often look bad. And we look bad because we're thwarted, we're delayed, we're sometimes obstructed. And it's sometimes, quite frankly, it's embarrassing not to be able to produce a result. But the fact of the matter is that's the reality of the environment you're dealing with. So it's a simple idea, I think, and one that I've often volunteered our organization to participate in crafting and assisting, and I think it can go a long way.
Thank you. So we've not solved that quandary, but we all agree it is a quandary. Are there any other questions before we start to wrap up? Apologies if I'm a little blinded by the light. I can't quite tell. No? Okay, so I want to give a chance to Yoni also to react to any of the two questions that you've heard, but in particular, I assume you might have a view on the need for a more joined up approach to how to drive things forward. And do you have any magic solutions for us there?
to help, the countries of the Caribbean
do something else.
So it's all in the delivery of how you explain what the school actually implements when we go. And if that's not in the back, we've been able to see it move across the public and the private sector.
Thank you very much. And Kieran, I'll return to you, and we just have a few minutes, but Yoni mentioned a fear of technology, and that actually is a good prompt for a question I wanted to ask you, which is how do we make sure that the disruptive technologies, and can include blockchain in that, are fully embraced rather than feared, and how do you overcome reticence in some quarters?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and actually leading back to these two questions as well, I think one of the biggest things, like I scout for a few VC funds as well, and like private equity, and one of the biggest things, like from the outside looking in, and please correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but it very much seems like the people, like a few of like really prominent venture capital funds would happily like drive money into spaces like the Caribbean, and like especially into like building out infrastructure tech-wise in the Caribbean. But there's like there seems to be anyway, like key policy bits and pieces involved where like driving that capital in is really difficult. And so I think, leading back to the question, what I would, for us anyway, and you've seen it with blockchain and you've seen it with carbon markets as well, you have to enable this really like amazing sandbox where like you're allowed to try new things, and like money is driven into the space almost freely, knowing that there's going to be a lot of work and things will and won't like succeed. But eventually you'll sort of get to a point where that will, and I mean, that sort of blockchain carbon markets is a like prime example. Like 18 months ago, nothing that I'm working on, like none of that tech existed. And it was just like one project, we sort of drove like $1 billion into the space over a month, and then like everything kicked off and everyone loved it. And so I think like enabling that sandbox for tech to innovate and sort of flow freely is definitely what I would say.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That'll set us up nicely for the panel that we'll have after the break about how to drive investment, what investors want, what are they looking for, and how do we bridge the gaps between the need and the demand. So thank you, all of you, you were fantastic panelists. I hope you all agree. I'm sure you do. Thank you for the questions and for your attention, and I will return after the short coffee break for an investor fireside chat. Thank you. I'll hand back over to Terry.
Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. I did say earlier that I had the opportunity of hosting a conference of which Courtney Fingar was a moderator, and she was exceptional. In fact, she's been able to finish this right on the money where we had maybe about 40 seconds left. Thank you so very much for how you moderated, how you flowed through with the questions and each panelist. I thought it was a very rich discussion, and I certainly appreciated the questions that were asked, especially the gentleman in the back. It is something that we've been discussing in Jamaica, where we figured out the pivot, we were resilient, we bounced back, we were able to make it and actually leverage technology. And now what we see in a lot of public and even private sectors is a regression. We're kind of feeling safe. We think, all right, it's business as normal, and we're thinking, no, actually what we need to do is keep pushing ahead to be ahead of the grain. So thank you for that question. And to our panelists, we appreciate you. Thank you for your insights, and we wish you all the best. So we just want to remind you, on your tables, in the center, you have your tent cards. Go ahead, scan the QR code just so that we can get feedback after each session. We would really appreciate it. And I understand that we have a representative from Trinidad, from the Republic, Trinidad Republic Limited, with the Amazon Echo Dot. I just had like a little pause in my brain a while ago. We had encouraged you guys as audience to scan a QR code because we had this amazing Amazon Echo Dot that would be given away, but they had to scan first, correct? So if they didn't scan, they don't stand a chance. Please come to the stage. This is from Trinidad Republic Limited. Let us find out who won. Is this a raffle? How do we figure this out? Or is this digital?
Digital. We would have done a random draw.
Okay, so it's already digital. You did a random draw. We're trusting you because we don't have anybody who can audit properly. But would you like to announce?
Good day, everyone. So we'd like to congratulate Melanie George Sharp for winning. Is Melanie here?
Melanie?
Melanie. Sharp. Let's see what
Melanie Sharp?
Melanie Sharp.
Do we know
So
what country?
Melanie may have pushed off already, but we have Melanie's contact information that we will reach out to her.
What's your name?
Monique McCovey.
So Monique just shut that table down a while ago. She called the name and then I heard somebody saying going once, going twice, because we're just like, if, what's her name, Melanie's not here, then we're just going to keep this party going. So apparently you don't have to be here to collect your prize. So we will reach out and we will announce it tomorrow where chances are she would be here. And if we call it tomorrow and she's not here, she said we have more Amazon dots. Okay, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank and acknowledge Trinidad Republic Limited for being a platinum sponsor. And we hope that we will find Melanie tomorrow. Thank you so very much. So, we've been talking about investments and how the Caribbean is the prime destination. And so, my grandfather comes from this particular island. And so, let us look at this video. Invest Barbados. Barbados is absolutely stunning, right? Thank you so very much again to our panelists and to our moderator. So we're going to take a quick comfort break. The comfort break is about 10 minutes, correct? It's about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. So we're giving you guys the opportunity to just stretch your legs, go and refresh yourself, get your coffee. Do not go away though, in terms of we have our final fireside chat. And that is going to be the investors' fireside chat. I think we learned quite a lot from that one. So go, stretch, get comfortable, but not too comfortable during our comfort break. And we will get back here in about 5 to 10 minutes.